Hi, folks. This is Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D., for the Institute for Dialectical Metarealism. I have found another statement related to genocide from a Bahá'í agency. The first two statements I read came from the supreme governing body of the Bahá'í world, the Universal House of Justice. This next statement I will read you is even more specific. And if I would have found it before, I would have included it in the previous presentation. Alas, I did not. But this statement is from the Baha'i International Community, which is an organization which represents the Universal House of Justice and Baha'i communities all over the world at the United Nations. I used to know the guy who ran the Baha'i International Community. He lived right near me. His name was Victor de Arugio. He was born and raised in Brazil, but he spoke flawless American English. We all called him Victor. Very, very humble man. I knew him well. I loved him. He has been dead for quite a while. I don't know exactly how long. If I had to guess, I would say at least 30 years. I look forward to seeing him when I leave this world and go into the next one. A wonderful soul. Someone that I was very, very close to and fond of. Since his death, his position has been filled by numerous individuals. I don't know who is the current person right now, but I'm sure it's a good person. The Baha'i International Community, or BIC office, always comes out with good and relevant papers, working papers on subjects, and this is no exception. I should have looked there before I made the last episode, but I did not. In any event, here I am, and I will read it for you. If you would rather not listen to me, I will place a link to the letter immediately below this video so you can read it for yourself. It is titled Rights of Indigenous Populations, and it is dated August 1st, 1988, and was written in Geneva, Switzerland. Madam Chairman, at this session, the working group has entered a new session in its endeavors. After 6 years of careful study of the concrete problems and issues facing indigenous peoples and their governments, the working group is ready to begin the drafting of an international declaration to safeguard the rights and promote the status of indigenous peoples. Throughout these 6 years, the members of the working group and of the many indigenous organizations that have contributed to its activities have shown great dedication, sincerity, and goodwill in forging ahead with its task. Their efforts are about to bear fruit. The Baha'i International Community congratulates you, Madam Chairman, on preparing a well-conceived draft set of principles as a starting point for discussion. We would like to make a few comments on these draft principles on the content of a declaration on indigenous rights and on the process of drafting the declaration. At the outset, we believe that any declaration on the rights of indigenous peoples must emphasize 4 major principles. 1, respect for indigenous communities and their cultures. 2, appreciation for cultural diversity. 3, full participation of indigenous peoples. And 4, cooperation between indigenous peoples and their governments. Firstly, a declaration should insist that indigenous peoples have the right to maintain and develop their unique cultures and ways of life. The declaration must, of course, condemn outright genocide, legally sanctioned discrimination, and other direct forms of oppression. But it should also call for efforts aimed at erasing more subtle forms of discrimination and prejudice directed towards indigenous peoples. Secondly, cultural diversity. Indigenous peoples have suffered terrible oppression because new settlers did not tolerate diversity, but viewed their own cultures as superior and more advanced. Pause. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Back to the article, back to the letter, I should say. Appreciation for diverse cultures and ethnic characteristics is, in the Baha'i view, a prerequisite for the elimination of discrimination against indigenous populations. How wonderful. We are convinced, therefore, that a declaration should call for educational measures that seek to foster an awareness of and appreciation for cultural diversity. All people, indigenous peoples, as well as members of other cultures, should have the opportunity to benefit from mind-broadening educational programs designed to increase understanding between indigenous peoples and the dominant society, as well as between different groups of the indigenous peoples themselves. For these reasons, we welcome Preliminary Draft Principle 11, adopted by the working group at the last session, affirming the right of indigenous people to, quote, promote intercultural information and education, recognizing the dignity and diversity of their cultures. End of quotation. Thirdly, indigenous peoples must have the right to participate fully and actively in their national societies and in decisions that affect them. Their participation will enrich the lives of their national communities. More importantly, it will allow them to guide their own destinies. Full and active participation will enable indigenous peoples to develop the confidence, self-reliance, and leadership skills that are essential if they are to play an active part in providing a higher level of social, economic, and spiritual well-being for their peoples. It will permit them to become fully contributing members of their national communities while simultaneously preserving their unique cultures and identities. A declaration must call for measures to promote the development of opportunities for such active participation of indigenous peoples. Fourthly, and finally, cooperation between indigenous peoples and their governments is essential. In the Baha'i view, respect for different cultures can only be achieved. I'll read that again. Respect for different cultures can only be achieved if we are able to perceive, underlying our cultural variations, our essential unity as one human race. Mutual respect will not come about through separatism or antagonism. Indigenous peoples feel understandable anger at the injustices they have experienced, but the amelioration of their current situation requires a new dialogue between indigenous peoples and their government. Positive communication aimed at finding ways to promote indigenous rights and participation. A declaration should call for such cooperation. It should advocate the creation of a permanent mechanism, perhaps an ombudsman or a successor to this working group, to bring indigenous peoples and their governments together on a regular basis so they can best air problems and perspectives and discuss remedies and solutions in a constructive manner. Madam Chairman, the Baha'i international community believes that the draft you have prepared admirably enunciates in an objective and positive way the four principles we have underlined: respect for indigenous culture, appreciation for diversity, full participation, and cooperation. While believing that a declaration on indigenous rights must focus on these principles in its substance, we are also convinced that they must characterize the process of drafting a declaration. The drafting process should reflect an understanding of and should encourage efforts to preserve the unique ways of life that indigenous peoples have cultivated. In drafting the declaration, the working group should seek opinions from a wide variety of groups and indigenous organizations, thereby exemplifying in practice the appreciation for cultural diversity that the declaration must espouse. Moreover, it should encourage the active participation of indigenous groups in the drafting process and foster a spirit of cooperation in this delicate yet crucial enterprise. Madam Chairman, it is evident that the working group is endeavoring to manifest the qualities we have just mentioned. We applaud the working group for this accomplishment. It shrines as an example to other United Nations human rights organs of the possibilities for allowing the victims of discrimination, in this case, indigenous peoples, to have a voice in world efforts to improve their situation. The working group has focused on safeguarding indigenous culture, all the while recognizing the vast and multifaceted array of cultures that deserve protection. It has conscientiously solicited the energetic participation of indigenous peoples in its deliberations, and also maintained an atmosphere of goodwill and cooperation. If the working group continues to follow the course it has wisely charted, we trust it will succeed in accomplishing its important mission. That is the end of the letter. How spectacular. I am really, really impressed, as always, with whatever the Baha'i international community produces. It is a wonderful body, and I have known many people who have worked for that body back when I lived in New York City and in its suburbs. What a great organization. And this document is a further reflection of that. It shows that they do not disappoint. Once again, they have come forward with a powerful letter proclaiming the importance of indigenous rights, proclaiming the importance of indigenous peoples participating in activities which involve them. Now, back to Gaza. What this letter shows is a Baha'i principle, a basic Baha'i principle called unity in diversity. Where is that Baha'i principle being practiced in Gaza? Where? Answer, it is not. It is not at all. And anybody with any kind of moral compass, with any level of conscience, should recognize that. I came across a website yesterday. I don't know how old it was. I didn't check the dates. But the topic was the genocide against Palestinians. And there were several people on that website, really a forum on that website, who said, well, the reason why we don't talk about genocide against Palestinians is because there is no genocide against Palestinians. All one needs to do is to open one's eyes. Even before now, Israel itself was founded on genocide, the killing of innocent Palestinians, the destruction of Palestinian homes, and the relocation of Palestinians from their homes into a penal colony, which became Palestine. How could a person proclaim that there is no genocide being carried out against the Palestinians even before this recent terrorist campaign started? That I don't know. But I really don't care. What I care about are the Palestinians. And clearly, the way that the Israeli government has been operating, it does not. It cares about itself. Netanyahu wants Israel to expand into Gaza. It wants Gaza for itself, and that is it. Palestinians be damned. Go where you want, Palestinians. That is the message being set by Bibi Netanyahu. Go where you want, if you can. If you can't, well, that's not our problem. And so I think that every person, including every Baha'i, should be totally outraged by what is happening right now in Gaza. It totally contradicts this statement being made by the Baha'i international community. Now, admittedly, this statement was made before the war started, years before the war started, but so what? The principle remains. The Gazans, the indigenous Palestinians of that area, are being treated with utter contempt. No respect is shown for their indigeneity. Certainly, Netanyahu and his government, which includes a number of different right-wing parties, have no respect for the Gazans or for the Palestinians as a whole. Neither does Joe Biden, who until recently was financing the terrorist campaign. And so I believe that anyone of moral conscience, whether Baha'i or not, must stand up and shout with the highest voice possible from our lungs our opposition to what is happening right now in Gaza. Not to do so, in my view, would literally disqualify a person from being a human being, from being a person endowed with humanity, which is a human being. And sadly, we see too many people who are willing to take the side of the Zionist entity, Israel, and are willing to condemn the Palestinians in this case the Gazans, to a life of suffering with no concern for them at all. No concern for their lives, no concern for their children's lives, no concern for anything to do with the Palestinians, including their homes, their food, or their water, which is all limited by Israel. And so, I want to affirm personally the declaration that is made by the Baha'i international community and say that if ever there was a time in which it should be applied, it is right now, to this horrendous situation in Gaza. But again, we must all speak with one voice, not multiple voices, one voice against it. As a Maoist third worldist, I condemn it as an attack upon an area which is both third world, developing, and fourth world, or indigenous. I attack it in both ways. A first world country, Israel, until recently supported by another first world country, the US, the most powerful country in the world, the most wealthy country in the world, the country with the greatest military strength in the world, has been showing its disdain for Palestinians and their rights. But we cannot be among them. All of us, no matter who we are, in my case, both a Baha'i and a Maoist third worldist, although I do not connect them with each other, I happen to be both of them, and so I will affirm that I am both of them, although I would not claim that they should be combined. No, they should not be combined. Doing so would show disrespect for each one of them. But everyone, even if you are a capitalist, whatever you are, whatever religion you belong to, or even if you belong to no religion, you must show your support for the indigenism of the Palestinians. That indigenism has been attacked ceaselessly by the Israeli government, especially by Benjamin Netanyahu, who obviously cares more about himself and not being kicked out of office, maintaining his position of power so he doesn't have to go through his corruption charges. I don't know what will happen in the future. As I have said many times in this podcast, I am not a prophet, and I'm happy I am not, because I honestly think that if I had that gift of prophecy, it would at this time be a curse, because I can only imagine what the future must be like. I can only imagine it, and I don't think that it will be good. I don't know, but I don't think. The immediate future does not appear to me to be bright. And it should be bright, especially for the third and fourth world peoples. And again, Gaza is both. Gaza is both a developing country or region, and Gaza is indigenous. And we should all love Gaza and the Gazans with every ounce of heart that we have, and try to think of ways in which we as individuals can help them, whether through conscientization by attending student protests, by contributing to charities, whatever. Any means we have at our disposal to help those poor people in Gaza who have done nothing wrong and yet are condemned to live their lives in a penal colony by the Israeli government. For the time being, this has been Mark, by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D., for the Institute for Dialectical Meta-Realism. Have a pleasant day and an even better day tomorrow.